I didn't read the comments because I realized everything becomes so polarized. And it just goes to show the level of conversation, the level of discourse that we appreciate, as opposed to what is the real thing to be discussed, which are these children on both levels who are really troubled. These are really troubled teens. And then again, it comes to where we are as a society, the kind of conversations we have in a public, in public fora, the kind of conversations we're listening to in Parliament, which is the highest office in the land, and the kind of ways that our public officials are speaking and they're communicating. Sometimes I ask myself, what is left for the children? Because if the adults are behaving badly and disrespectfully and without any ethics and any sort of protocols, you know, where the morals at that level, then what are you expecting for the children? Children replicate, they take example from adult behavior.
Well, in fact, even in the media, I mean, the sort of very noisy kind of talk shows that we have on right now, it sets an example for kids, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and honestly...
It's okay to scream about certain things and sort of shout out about people and individuals and tear them down.
Well, honestly, I try not to listen as best as I can to local talk radio, because I really do find some of the conversations are very, very base and improper. And it speaks again to the kind of individuals who are hosting some of these shows. Some of it speaks to their level of intellect, the level of critical thinking skills, and the type of social conscience that they have. And what also lacks, Vernon, at all levels is what I've come to realize is sensitivity training, understanding what is politically correct, what is incorrect. How do we speak about individuals who may be gay and lesbian? How do we speak about people who are being sexually abused? How do we speak about people or underrepresented or misrepresented groups? And we lack that level of emotional intelligence in how we relate and how we discuss and how we discourse topics.
Now, as a professional, were you to deal with a bullied kid and the bully, how would you deal with them appropriately?
Well, definitely both of them need to get some level of therapy. Of course, with the child who's been the victim, it's to work that child through the expressions and the emotions and the feelings. The child who is the victimizer, you definitely have to do a social history into that child and understand where that level of violence came. Of course, where you have it happening on video or camera phone or whatever form of technology that was used, you also have a fourth party in there. So you have the victim, the victimizer, the person who's actually taping, and the camera itself becomes a fourth individual, because when a camera goes on, people start to manage a particular type of image. They start to role play. So they start to want to look even tougher on that video because they're selling an image now. You really have to treat with that. Then you have to treat with the parents, because from what I realized, neither the mother of the victim or the victimizer knew the situation had existed. And then from other videos that were published on Facebook, even the mother of the victim did not really seem that moved and that interested. So if she was not accosted by another TV host and a lawyer, I mean, she said she made a report to the police and that was it. But there was really no extra motivation on her part to really deal with the situation. So it also goes to show that a lot of parents in Trinidad and Tobago also need to be educated, because they're raising children and they may think they're providing shelter, you know, food and the basic necessities. But what about the love? What about the caring? And particularly, what about the understanding?
Now, is it really possible for the victim to deal with the trauma as long as that video is still out there, for example?
Well, you know, I mean, children are very resilient. And I think the humans are very resilient. And resiliency is that ability to bounce back. I mean, it makes us who we are. And I think even in this situation, there may be no extraordinary amount of harm because, as I said, children bounce back. I mean, the funny thing with kids, and particularly when you work in the school context.
But they think they bounce back, but maybe 20 years down the line, it may manifest itself.
Well, it may manifest, and you'd hope that once there's the psychological intervention or there's some sort of counseling, that it's not some sort of crisis counseling, that they will be walked through it emotionally and they move beyond that. Because at the end of the day, we've all grown up with situations that have sort of tainted us. But eventually when you become an adult, you have to tell yourself, listen, I put this past me and I've now moved on, because we can't hold on, to those situations. I mean, there's a psychologist, I can't remember his name, but he says, your childhood is something that happens to you once, thank God. It doesn't happen to you.
I agree completely.
It doesn't happen to you any other in your life course. So, I mean, people could move beyond that, but it's the interventions. And what we're realizing in Trinidad and Tobago at all levels, we lack the interventions, the procedure, the best practice to treat with situations before they really, catapult into something even grander and more psychologically distressing.
You mentioned re-victimizing earlier. What's that about?
Re-victimization usually comes in a situation where individuals have been victimized, and what happens is their life choices become a game of Russian roulette, where they somehow always make the wrong choices. So you find for a lot of young women sometimes, and young men who've been sexually abused, would find themselves again going into relationships where they always become the victim because of the choices they make. It's a psychological, a sort
so
of...
you actually become comfortable feeling like a victim.
Exactly,
because
you start to think that is love. You start to think that if I'm not victimized, or if someone does not treat me badly, they're not, because you've not come to terms with your experience, you've not been treated for that, you've not had the psychological interventions, and you find yourself in that Russian roulette sort of a relationship experience, and you always sort of lean towards the individual who would continue to victimize you.
So basically then, if somebody is badly bullied as a kid now and doesn't get the treatment that you say they desperately need, then maybe years on you've basically ruined their life.
You've ruined their lives, and sometimes they become the victims, and sometimes they become the victimizer. It is such a very contentious and volatile psychological space that we enter into when it comes to violence, because they show you that children who are exposed to violence, domestic violence, children who have witnessed rape, witnessed a murder or homicide in the home, a lot of times adults feel, like, a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, they didn't see anything, or they didn't understand what they see. But there is something called the historic conscience, and certain emotions and experiences are trapped right there, and they start to realize themselves. Flashbacks, nightmare, all sorts of other experiences that bring these experiences to the fore. And this is why, particularly in the United States, they've created victim rights programs. And these programs treat with child victims and of course child witnesses, people who've seen violence, to ensure they get the proper interventions, particularly individuals who've witnessed violence, because it shows, and the statistics are there, that show that somehow they eventually find themselves moving into a lifestyle of violence, and particularly young men who move into a situation of juvenile delinquency that takes them on a life course now of adult criminality.
Now, in terms of the effects of bullying, is it different for boys and for girls?
Definitely, because you find with girls, it's more a lot of taunting and nagging. You'd find with the girls, they would do the text wars, they would do the, the reputation, destroying people's reputation, the name calling. With the boys, you see a real expression of violence and the hitting. Of course, some girls do move beyond the taunting.
Well, I've actually seen it myself.
Well, exactly, yeah. They get very violent, but that is just, individual case, because you find mostly with the women, it's usually, more verbal, more psychological, or exclusion, leaving you out of something. And that's also a form of bullying. To exclude
a very
individuals.
Effective form,
very,
actually.
very effective form to exclude individuals. Recently in the summertime, I did a training session for the Ministry of Education with about 25 new guidance officers. And at first I was a little hesitant, but I decided to show them the movie Kidulthood. And Kidulthood is a movie that comes out of the UK, and it really deals with bullying on all levels. And particularly in that movie, there was a situation with 2 girls, and one bullying the other until she committed suicide. So, at all levels, you see the violence, but the question is, what do we do? So now that we've had this big expose with these 2 young men, we've had some sort of apprehension, very inappropriate and very dramatic, did not like how that situation was played out because these are minors. It was almost
bullying in itself.
It was certainly bullying in itself. It does, I mean, a TV host does not go to someone's house and call them out and starts to, bully the mother and bully the children and bring them into contact like that. Inappropriate. But how do we deal with it? So it happens. What is the response from the Ministry of Education? What is the response from the school? What is the response from the psychological fraternity? We've had 0 responses, and that's how we continue. Every day in TNT, things happen, we don't treat with it, and it intensifies, and the situation escalates, and then what do we have? We ask ourselves, why is our crime rate so high?
Or end up with another dead kid, perhaps.
And who wants that?
If you had to address one of the kids right now who's being bullied, what would you tell them in terms of getting them through that period of their life?
You know, the thing is, as a psychologist, it's not what I am going to tell them, it's what they are going to tell me, because it has to be an open-ended experience. As a therapist...
Because every experience is different, isn't it?
It is. All I must provide for them is an environment of a congruent environment where there is positive reinforcement, where they feel open enough to share. Because you see, teenagers, and sometimes I think adults forget that we were there at one time, and that creates the disconnect. Because it's not about me telling them, it's about them telling me what they are experiencing, why the need to express yourself in a violent way. And all that I must create for them is a plan of action to take them where they need to go. Because the focus is not so much on the act of violence, but what creates the environment psychologically and socially for you to behave like that. Because you're going to find out from them the experiences that have propelled them to this life course. And then now it's to provide for them positive reinforcement, positive experiences, positive role modeling, and positive environments where they could now develop into that whole, more holistic type of individual that we want in society, instead of me really dictating to them and saying, well, this is what you did, these are the things that are wrong. People need to find their way, and particularly with teenagers, they are going to find their way. But they must feel that care, they must know that they have that confidence in adults to really share and to allow them to sort of recreate their personal narratives, you know, sort of re-engineer their cognitive landscapes and find a place of comfort, a place of equilibrium where they could start to understand who they are and what society really expects of them and what they can contribute to building the kind of nation that we want as a society.
Renee, we're out of time, but speaking to you always opens my eyes. Thank you so much for being
so
on the
much.
program.
Thanks
Pleasure
again.
having you.
Certainly.
You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.